Please be seated.
Yes, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Your Honour. Just a few more points, if I may. In relation to the UNMIC documents, employment documents, and weapons charges and the like that were referred to, Your Honours, of course, will remember the purpose for which they were adduced, which was to enable the court to follow the record of questions that were put, not for the truth of their contents. And unless the witness has accepted any part of them, then they have no evidential value. So clearly, Your Honours will need to carefully look at the part of the record that deals with the documents as they were put during the course of cross-examination to extract from it what, if anything, he actually accepted. And my recollection, we haven't had the time to go back through all of it, is that he didn't accept very much, if anything, from them. But don't take my word for it, as it were. Have a look at what was said and see to the extent to which anything was adopted. And then that will be, of course, that can then be used in the record, but nothing else from it can. One of the aspects was whether it could establish a time frame, for example, from 2002, 1998 to 2002. But my recollection, looking back at the record, is that the witness didn't accept the document that was being put to him. I just want to make that small point. Can I address, please, some of the issues raised in the supplemental, well, I won't call it filing, but in the supplemental document that was handed up by Mr. Haradinaj. As we don't have time today to go through all of them, I just want to pick out a few. In relation to point 4, it's suggested that the issue that's taken is that we have said people could not go to Albania and procure weapons without the knowledge of Mr. Haradinaj, and then a reference is made in this document to evidence in the retrial. Your Honours, there are a number of aspects to this, but in particular, Mr. Haradinaj asserts that Skender Rex Hamitai testified that their village took their own initiative to get weapons from Albania. And in support of that remark, they cite to transcript T 103120 to 10333. But nowhere in that evidence, 103120 to 10333, does Mr. Rex Hamitai suggest that the people from his village travelled without the knowledge and assistance of Mr. Haradinaj. There is also another document, which is P297, which is one of the in the record, which is one of the statements given by Mr. Rex Hamitai and admitted pursuant to Rule 92 ter. And in that paragraph,
the question to ask is there evidence where we are told that people left with Mr. Haradinaj's consent, or with Mr. Haradinaj's
well, Your Honour, we say the
knowledge and consent?
Yes, the inference comes particularly from Rex Hamitai P297.
It's an inference.
Paragraph 7 to 9. And says, in order to organise the village defence, we worked with the Glodjane HQ in order to get weapons. We organised groups across the border and get weapons in Albania. When the Serbs attacked Iznik on 29 May 98, we were very well organised. Paragraph 8.
And who are the we? Who organised?
The KLA. Villagers who wanted to organise a village defence in their villages went to see Ramush. Those at the Gllogjan headquarter had experience in getting weapons from Albania. They knew the safe routes to cross into Albania. In the beginning, we sent 3 groups from Iznik through Gllogjan to get weapons. The arming was an organised operation. I don't know who coordinated the operation. In early 98, a group of 9 or 10 from Iznik went to Gllogjan. They joined a group of 250 people and were led by Ramush to get weapons from Albania. Your Honours, and there's also paragraph 9. So, you know, as I'm sure Your Honours understand, one has to look at the totality of all of the evidence, all of the documents, and all of the transcript that has been admitted from the various witnesses. And the parties, I was going to make this point at the end, but it may be a sensible point to make right now. The parties, of course, pick and make their representations based upon what's available in the record. And as one would in a jury case, as judges often direct a jury, that it's not what we say that matters at the end of the day. What matters is your assessment of the totality of the evidence. What we say is not evidence in the case. It's your assessment of the totality of the evidence that matters. And what we are doing is making an argument and referring for that.
All of you as you go along.
Pardon, Your
And
Honour.
all of you cherry picking as you go along.
And, Your Honours, we're all taking things to make the argument, to seek to present the evidence.
We understand that.
Okay. Your Honours, and I hope we're not unfairly doing that. It's certainly not an intention, and it has been suggested. Your Honours, at paragraph point 8, again, I just wanted to touch it. Point 8 that is made in the supplemental document.
So while you are looking for that, I just
Yes.
want to correct how I'm recorded here. I said, and you are all, and I was referring to both sides, cherry picking. I was not referring to one side only. So I just want to make sure that I'm recorded correctly.
Yes. Well, paragraph 8 in the supplemental document refers to paragraph 31 of the brief, and the complaint that's raised is relating to Mr. Haradinaj working closely with Mr. Balaj, and Mr. Haradinaj controlling the deployment of the Black Eagles. And there are some references raised there by Mr. Haradinaj's counsel. We would just direct your attention, in addition to the materials already available, to the unchallenged evidence at paragraph 21 of Mr. Rex Hemataj's 92 ter statement exhibited at P297, where Mr. Rex Hemataj stated that had I needed Toger's assistance, I would have had to contact Ramush. Ramush had to authorize any deployments of Toger's unit. And in respect to the close relationship between Haradinaj and Balaj, Mr. Haradinaj doesn't refer specifically to witness 17's evidence at transcript T7557 of P342, that, quote, meetings that we had were directly with Ramush, while Idriz Balaj accompanied him, and he was responsible for his security during the travel to and back from the meeting, end quote. And also a further reference at T7558 of P432, where he says the Black Eagles were the special unit of the Kosovo Liberation Army that was under Ramush's command. At every meeting, the travels to Jasic, and later in Prapachan and in Lyuk, the arrival at Baran, the oath that the brigade took, this solemn event, on all these occasions Idriz Balaj was present too, in the capacity of the person responsible for security. And then there is, I won't read it, but I'll direct you to it, paragraph 15 of the statement exhibited as P344 under seal. Sorry, I think I said P432, I meant earlier P342. The T7558 reference is of P342. And then in paragraph 15 of the statement exhibited at P344 under seal, there is some further information which should be taken into account. And also, Skender Rex Hemataj at paragraph 41 of his 92 ter statement exhibited as P298 says, quote, you could see at the meetings that Togeri was close to Ramush Haradinaj. I think they spent time together and that this closeness partly stemmed from that, end quote. There is also evidence from Rustam Tetay and Shemsuddin Chekai, who testified to having met Haradinaj in April 98 and confirmed that Balaj was with him during those meetings. And the underlying evidence for that is cited at paragraph 32 of the brief. Your Honours, also I just picked a few. Point 23, there is a reference in point 23 relating to Mr. Haradinaj appointing soldiers to serve in Jablanica. I've partly answered this already in the submissions I made earlier relating to the formation of the 2nd Brigade. And P242 is an order which shows that on the 11th of July, Mr. Haradinaj appointed Shemseddin Çekai to form the 2nd Brigade in the zone which covered Jablanica. And P248 is an order of the 12th of July issued by Mr. Haradinaj appointing those who would serve under Çekai in that brigade. Amongst those was Driton Zanelli, who was to serve as the commander of the 2nd Battalion, and Bislim Zarapi also testified that he visited Jablanica in mid-July and indicated at transcript 685 that, quote, when I visited Jablanica after the meeting of the General Staff and the staffs from the operative zones, alongside me when inspecting those units was Sally Veseli and, if I remember correctly at the time, Driton Zanelli as well. And Zarapi confirmed at T685 that Zanelli reported to Haradinaj. Clearly he was already operating in Jablanica on the basis of the orders of the 11th and 12th of July. Your Honours, then just touching the witness 66 point that Mr. Harvey raised relating to the time and date that witness 66 refers to. It's right that he did give a date of the 19th of May, but when he was questioned about when the witnesses went, when the victims disappeared, he was questioned at some length about this. It's at P106, and the transcript references in that exhibit are at 8432 to 8434. And he made it clear, under having been asked several times about this, he was asked at 8433, in fact, just come back just slightly before that. Just forgive me a moment. In fact, I'll go back to 8432. Question. Okay. On the day that the 3 men went missing, was there any shelling in the area? Answer. About 4 or 5 days later in their village. It's not, interpreter, there was a question, it's not clear whether the shelling lasted 4 or was it 4 days. Judge Ori asked to repeat the question. There was some toing and froing between counsel. And then we get to the 8433 as to try to clarify this. So the witness said, so after they went missing, 4 or 5 days later, there was non-stop shelling. And Judge Ori said, yes, during all these days, or did it start 4 or 5 days after they went missing? Witness, 4 or 5 days elapsed before the shelling started. Judge Ori, that's clear. And now, Ms. Gustafsson, will you ask more detail where the shelling took place?
Then from that, do we understand then that they went missing 4 or 5 days after the 19th of May?
No, before the 19th of May.
But that meant that sentence
when
that
the
you've just
shelling
read.
started.
Yeah, that question, that answers Judge Ori's question.
Yes,
to clarify.
before the shelling started.
Just read it again.
Sorry.
Just read the question and the answer.
During all these days, or did it start 4 or 5 days after they went missing?
That's right.
4 or 5 days elapsed before the shelling started, i.e. after they went missing.
Yeah, so they went missing 4 or 5 days. Now we know that the shelling started on the 19th.
Well, 19, 20, 21st, sometime around there.
So they went missing
before
4 or 5 days before then.
Yes. Correct. That's the argument that we've made, and this is the evidence, along with the other evidence of witness 3 and witness 80, that supports the timing of the missing of the victims. And it goes on. I won't read it all, but there's more that deals with that issue at 8434. Your Honours, there wasn't a suggestion made at some point by Mr. Harvey relating to prior acquittals, but I'm sure I don't need to say, in the context of this retrial, it's the evidence in this case upon which Your Honours will make the determinations relating to the counts and not on the basis of anything that may have happened in any other trial on any other occasion.
Except that we've got to take care of res judicata and atre for acquis and atre for convi, shouldn't we?
Sorry, I didn't.
We should.
Res judicata?
Yeah, indeed. Think on issues that have not been appealed.
Your Honours, for matters that are in issue before you in this case, then the res judicata cannot arise.
No, res judicata cannot arise on the counts. But as I understood what Mr. Harvey was saying, he was talking specifically about those issues on which the first trial has given a final judgment and were not appealed. And I understand that, yes, the issues before us are things that have been sent back to us.
Yes.
And the impression he left me with was that things have slipped in which shouldn't have slipped in. And we were going to look with a very fine comb whether there were anything that slipped in that shouldn't have been in, and we will point it out if it is there. If it is not there, of course, there's no res judicata, and there's no atre for acquis or atre for convi.
No, that may be relevant for some of the counts for which convictions have already been entered. But in terms of the time frame of the trial of this indictment and all of the issues that are connected with whether a JCE existed or not, what the accused were or were not doing in relation to the counts, those are live because those are issues that you have to determine in relation to what was going on, whether there was or wasn't a joint criminal enterprise and the like.
Okay, we hear you, we heard him, and we hear both of you.
Your Honours, really those are all the submissions that I would wish to make, unless there are any things that my colleagues think I should do. Did I miss it? Which one was that? 8. Which number was that? I thought I did. Oh, I omitted. I meant to deal with point 6 also off of Mr. Haradinaj's list. If I omitted to do that, can I just deal with that? That's the issue relating to the appointment of Din Krasniki. And Your Honours, we again direct you to some further material on this issue. First of all is Exhibit P347, where Mr. Hassanai states that Ramush Haradinaj came to Vranok on many occasions. He came to announce the appointment of Din Krasniki as commander of the Lugu Ibaran region, which included about 25 villages, including Vranok, in mid-April. These representatives have been sent from our village to Glodjane to ask Ramush Haradinaj's approval for this appointment, end quote. He then also dealt with that a little more in P36 at T8743, when he said he'd only heard that 3 people had gone to Ramush, and didn't know whether they had met him or how it was resolved, but went on to confirm that Din Krasniki became the commander, and then of course we all supposed that this was done with the approval of Ramush, end quote. Now, consistent with that proposition for Din Krasniki's appointment comes from witness 17, who testified in P344 at transcript 7659 to 7660, that Din Krasniki said that he had been appointed by Ramush. He told me that on the 12th of July when I arrived in Vranok, and when we had the meeting with the commanders of the villages and with Krasniki. I'm sorry, P342, I misspoke. And there's also further reference at transcript 5741 of P52. Your Honours, the final point that I would make very briefly is in relation to Mr. Harvey made the point about the crossroads. You'll recall him saying that if there was fighting going on the 19th of May, it would be difficult to get from Dolok to Gravenica, which is why, if it wasn't going on 3 or 4 days earlier, perhaps it was much easier to get from Dolok to Grabanica, hence their appearance in the village. It's just a thought, maybe something Your Honours wish to take into account in due course. Your Honours, those, I'm pleased to say, are all of the submissions that I would wish to make.
Mr. Rogers. Yes, Mr. I did suspect that a rejoinder might come.
Thank you, Your Honours. It will be a very, very brief rejoinder, just in response to some of the points that Mr. Rogers has raised. The first in relation to the alleged presence in the compound area. Mr. Rogers cited, I think, over 100 pages of the transcript as authority for that. There is simply no evidence that in relation to the fleeting moment that witness X, as we referred to him now, where witness X says that Mr. Haradinaj was there. There's simply no evidence that that occurred in the compound area or the barracks area. And I refer to the specific transcript pages where he discusses this particular incident, and that's firstly 2382, and then an earlier reference 2349, and then transcript 2420 to 2421 is where he discusses only seeing him very, very briefly. And when those actual transcript pages are looked at, it simply doesn't support the allegation that Mr. Rogers is now making.
Hadn't he somewhere else told us where he were, where they were, generally?
Yes, that's in T2349.
Where did he say they were?
He just said the KL headquarters generally. He did not specify in any detail that it was the compound or the barracks or any particular area. In relation to the incident with Skendakuchi, he specifically said that took place in the staff, and that's at T2374.
But where would the headquarters be?
Your Honor, I would refer you to paragraph 93 of our final brief, where we list the evidence of other witnesses about the location of the headquarters, and you'll see at 93D that Mr. Zairapi, who testified that he went to Jabanica in mid-July, said that the KLA command post he believed was situated in Mr. Lahi Brahimai's house, and that's where the meeting took place, and that he was then shown various other positions in the village. Peter Schala, and this is at 93A, said that it was about a 5 to 7 minute walk from Mr. Lahi Brahimai's house to the barracks building. That was at the entrance of the village, whereas Mr. Brahimai's house was in the heart of the village, and that was about 5 to 7 minutes walk away. And we've then listed the evidence which shows that on each occasion when Mr. Haradinaj, it is said, was in Jabanica, he wasn't in fact, there's no evidence in fact that he was at the compound area.
Can I ask a question? The premises that we have been shown through the trial,
Yes.
showing the two buildings with a yard and a building that is alleged to have had water, what is that called?
That's called the compound area or the barracks area. That's at the entrance of the village. And then 5 to 7 minutes away into the heart of the village is where the houses are. And that's where Mr. Zairapi says that the command post was situated, or the staff, which was where meetings took place according to the evidence that we've listed.
But then any detainee, okay, on this day, this person was not a detainee.
No, and there's no evidence what I'm saying.
They had been brought from wherever, together with the 20 to 30 people. Now, is the position of Mr. Haradinaj's defense that these people were brought to Lahi Brahimai's house, which is the headquarters, according to you?
No, our position is that when you look at the evidence that witness X gives about where this all happened, there was this fleeting moment in late May where he saw Mr. Haradinaj. There's no description in the evidence of where that exactly takes place. And that's why it's wrong for Mr. Rogers to say, oh, he's given evidence very clearly that this all took place in the compound, in the barracks where detainees were. There's no evidence. That's the fundamental point Mr. Emerson was making yesterday. There's no evidence to show that on that occasion, that fleeting moment, that took place where anyone was detained, and that therefore the prosecution can't draw any inference that Mr. Haradinaj must have known that there was a detention facility or people were detained there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Honor. That's the first point. The second, very briefly, is in relation to the list with Skendakuchi's name on. Mr. Rogers cited to various parts of his 92-ter statement and then evidence in chief. What Mr. Everson referred to yesterday was the cross-examination, where those particular allegations were scrutinized, and the witness said very clearly, we saw the video of it, very clearly that he didn't know who gave him this list, that he didn't believe that it had anything to do with criminal activities, and that he didn't pass this information on to anyone, including Mr. Haradinaj. So it's in that context that we were trying to show the trial chamber that it's so important not just to look at the 92-ter statement, just pick out that one paragraph, or what he might have said in examination in chief. It's the whole of the evidence that needs to be looked at, because when that was considered, he made it abundantly clear that he didn't know where this list came from. In fact, as was also pointed out, it was recorded below the appointment of FARC military police officers. The appointment of that unit was the entry above that. So there is an inference that can be made that it might have related to FARC. But really the bottom line in our submission was that that was the evidence he gave at the end of it when it was all considered. He couldn't say where that list had come from. And therefore for the prosecution to cite his evidence as a firm basis to infer that it's a KLA blacklist that was circulated.
To cite his evidence in chief.
Yes.
Either by way of a statement or way of evidence in chief in proper. Okay.
Precisely, and that is misleading not to cite his evidence in chief if you're going to rely upon it for a central allegation, that this is a list that was circulating that has led to certain people disappearing who are charged on the indictment.
Okay.
So I just wanted to clarify that was the point we were making yesterday. And exactly the same applies to the list of allegations that were handed up to your Honours yesterday. Many of them were referred to in Mr. Emerson's closing speech, some of them not. But the reason why we have submitted this, and it's not comprehensive, it doesn't cover every single allegation, but is to ensure that if an allegation is made by the prosecution, that the full evidence, not just the 92-ter or part of the evidence, is brought to your Honour's attention. In that sense, we hope that it can assist. It doesn't only refer to the evidence of one witness, it might refer to other witnesses to show that really it's important that not only the totality of one witness is looked at, but all of the evidence when put together. Does it support the allegation that is made by the prosecution or not? And that is why we've headed the list. It's both inaccuracies. There are things that are just blatantly wrong. But then also there's evidence that might have been selectively, or that has been selectively taken. And it's important that the totality of the evidence is looked at in order that the allegation can be exposed for what it is, that it doesn't support, when the evidence is looked at as a whole, what the prosecution is alleging. Then the final point that I wanted to mention was in relation, Your Honours, to the order of the 5th of July that Mr. Rogers referred to, with Mr. Brahima being replaced. We've dealt with this in our brief at paragraph 123, and it's clearly set out there that while we say this order reflects Mr. Haradinaj's authority over appointments to that joint structure that was created on the 23rd of June, it no way implies close knowledge or de facto day-to-day control over the activities that were continuing in Jabanica, and certainly does not imply any knowledge of detention or ill treatment there. It shows authority over the zonal structure, the appointment of persons within that structure. Mr. Brahimai was the deputy commander, as the evidence shows. But you can't infer from that therefore he had authority over the specific areas, each and every one of them. The evidence is that he could not command each and every area and did not, in reality, do that. And that's what we were emphasizing throughout the submissions yesterday, the horizontal nature in which things continued even after the 23rd of June. So I just wish to emphasize that aspect of our submission again, Your Honor. Your Honor, finally, if I can just make one correction for the record. Mr. Harvey said that Mr. Everson made an error in referring to what was said in relation to the Skender Kuchi incident. He said this at page 52, line 1 today. In fact, Mr. Emerson was correct in referring to the evidence of what witness X said. He made that reference to the evidence at page 2809, line 15, on Monday. That's the correct transcript page, and it does accurately reflect what witness X did say, so there was no need to correct it. I just wanted to make sure that was properly cited for the record. Thank you, Your Honor. Those are
You don't want to quote what he said on Monday?
He said, as to their second occasion, this is witness X says he once saw Mr. Haradinaj remonstrating with Lahi Brahimai about the ill treatment of Skender Kuchi. So that was coming from witness X. I mean, I should add that it was just before that Mr. Emerson indicated that the allegations that had been made about Mr. Brahimai and Mr. Bala were for other persons to address. And then he went on to look at the allegations in relation to Mr. Haradinaj specifically. And then he quoted his evidence. And he has actually quoted it correctly, is the point I'm just making for the record.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honours, may I just narrow that range down? I did
Okay,
give you
just before you do that, let's just exhaust the entire defense in terms of
certainly. I just
rejoinder.
wanted to. I thought maybe now was a good moment.
Well,
if you would prefer not, I'll do it.
Yeah, I would prefer it a little later. Do you have any? I don't believe you have anything to say, Mr.
Yes,
You do?
I do. Ever so briefly, once again, we're back with witness 66. I think what is painfully evident is that the chamber needs to read the entirety of this witness's testimony.
Chamber will read the entirety of the proceedings.
At page 8422, so there is no mistake with what regard to what this witness actually testified to. Question, witness, when was the last time you saw your cousin? And I'd like to remind you not to mention his name. Answer, on the 19th of May, 1998, that was the last time I saw him. And what was he doing when you last saw him? He was grinding corn, and then he placed it in a sack. He was milling the corn, and then he went on to the mill to do that. And his testimony continues from that point.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Troop?
Your Honours, on behalf of Mr. Brahimai, we don't have anything further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Troop. Yes, Mr.
Your
Rogers.
Honours, thank you. Can I just narrow that reference that I gave you for the headquarters point from 2333 to 2361 will give you, in fact, yes, 2361 will give you a fair amount of that, and there is more, in fact, going on from there, 2368, we were, until 223. In fact, 2386. It's dealt with in a number of places, and those are the two main places.
Rogers. I guess we can adjourn. We shall adjourn to a date to be set for judgment. Court adjourn.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.